called The Shadow of the Academy, Prejudice, Neo-colonialism and Taboo in the Academic Study of Ayahuasca. So this talk came about because I used to be the librarian of an academic ayahuasca list, and somebody sent this question into the list: can ayahuasca cure cancer? And the academics put their heads together and they came out with this answer: there is no data about ayahuasca curing cancer. So I thought it was quite interesting. There may be anecdotal reports. I thought it was interesting for two reasons. Firstly, it raises a question: what is data? I have two friends, both of whom seem to believe that ayahuasca cured their terminal cancer. One of them had lung cancer, she had 12 months to live, she said, well, I'm not going to take this, I might as well take Daimi, and she drank it, and she's fine. She lives by a lake in Brazil. Someone asked me for a link on this. She lives by a lake somewhere in Brazil. There is no link. There's no literature on her. She's a woman who cured her cancer. That's what she thinks. It's an anecdotal report. Another friend of mine was waiting in her house, and someone came up the path with a compost unit to deliver. And something strange happened. But anyway, he happened to be on the phone to somebody else. And he was on the phone to a Japanese woman, and the woman who opened the door, my friend, was a Japanese woman, and he got confused and he passed the phone to her, and the phone said, if you want to drink Daimi, you have to stop taking pharmaceuticals for 6 weeks. And she said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm on chemotherapy and I'm dying. I've got bone cancer, and I'm on anti-depressants and I'm still depressed. And the phone said, well, if you want to drink Daimi, you have to stop it for 6 weeks. And she did, and she's fine. This is about 15 years ago. Right, so this is what you call an anecdotal report. That's not data. Right, so are these academics racist? So it's a leading question, isn't it? So we're going to ask this question a lot today. Are these people racist? No, they're not racist. Does science privilege one way of viewing the world? What is data? Okay. So I'm going to give you an anecdotal report about me. This is me when I was younger. I don't know if you can see that. That was a sandfly bit me, gave me a protozoal infection called leishmaniasis. That's the first stage of it. Second stage, it attacks the cartilage in your ears and nose, dissolves your face and throat and stomach. And I decided I was going to treat this with Daimi, and the people around me thought I was insane. I was living in the Amazon at the time, and they said, no, you need to treat it with antimonium tartrate injections, 150, 180, maybe 220, every day, 3 days, three times a day into your veins. I said, I'm not doing that. I'm going to drink Daimi. I came here to learn about Daimi, and I believe that it can deal with this kind of thing. So what is Daimi? Well, it's medicine. It's ayahuasca. It's already got 2 ingredients in it, which is quite complicated for science to study. It's also got other things. You know, when I treated my leishmaniasis, I used frog medicine. I used the bark of cajueira. I used the bark of maratera. I used the bark of mango. I also went to go and I did lots of rituals, lots of Daimi rituals involving music. How do you put music under the microscope? How can you study this stuff? That's the question, right? It involves lines like this: curo tudo, expulso tudo com poder do Pai Eterno, which means I cure everything, I expel everything with the power of the Divine Father. Can the Divine Father cure cancer? There's another question. I went to a Umban Daimi ceremony where I was given instructions by a 400-year-old slave incorporated into the body of a medium who passed kind of flowers over my skin and gave me prayers to do and leaves to throw in the river and things like that. And of course there's Mestre Ireneo, who is the founder of our lineage, without which we weren't really, well, certainly Daimistas don't call it Daimi. So the question is, I mean, it's very, very complicated, isn't it? But that's me getting better, and I was better there. And something happened whilst I got ill. Well, whilst I was recovering, I met this woman, Gilda, and then I married her, and then we had 2 children. And they were twins. I was celibate the whole time. That ended right at the end, and she fell pregnant straight away. Both of them were born with birthmarks in the same place as my wound was. Both of my girls, and that was just one bit of a whole load of crazy magic that happened all the way. Now, I thought this was rather significant, so I took this to my curandero, the guy who'd been helping me through this disease, and I said, look at my magics. I showed him about 5 years later when I took my kids to meet him, and he said, oh, it left a tag, did it? Because this is very, very normal in the Amazon. It happens all the time. Magic happens all the time if your eyes are open to it. So I thought that was significant, but of course it's not, because that's significance. P equals 0.05. This is magical thinking. And this is what we need to get out of the academy if we're going to really understand things, isn't it? No, it's not. Right. So how can science assess this? Right. Science tends to take one fact or one condition, sticks it under the microscope and says, well, if we don't have this and we do have this. So I'll tell you what, we'll do the whole thing again, but don't go and see the medium. And then we'll do it 30 times, and then we'll see if it cures cancer or if it cures your thing. Science cannot assess this kind of thing. It is impossible. All right? Is that a problem? Is that a failing of ayahuasca? No, that's a failing of science. All right? Does that mean we can't use science? No, of course we can use science. It's a knowledge system. But we can think about some other knowledge systems. So ayahuasca is part of a complex, always part of a complex, like what Mark was talking about ritual. Very difficult to drink ayahuasca outside of ritual. I mean, you can, but... So what about knowledge, other knowledge systems? How do we deal with other knowledge systems? So I'm going to look at some comparative history here. We're going to go back to the 1870s in Australia. And we're going to look at how Chinese medicine was viewed by the authorities and how similar motifs are playing out in how we view ayahuasca, or how ayahuasca is studied today. So there was a diphtheria outbreak. 1 in 2,000 people were dying. It swells up the throat. Often children, sometimes a family would lose 3 or 4 children in the space of a week. Horrific and horrible disease. And they didn't have much to do. There wasn't much medicine for it. People were trying different things. But Chinaman John's magic powder seemed to be doing the job. And Chinaman John, his name was actually Asu. This is his knowledge system, the Fa-Fu Feng Ji. I'm not going to explain that. What he would do was he would take a bamboo tube with some chemicals in it and blow it down the throat of these children who were infected. And he was getting a great deal of success, got a little bit of fame in the area, and so a local politician decided that this should be studied in a formal manner. So what do? And this politician, he said that Arsu should run a trial, right? But that didn't happen because he wasn't allowed to run a trial. Other physicians took his stuff, fired it down the throat of children, and found, guess what, it doesn't work. So the outcry continued. I mean, people were dying. And so a chemical analysis was done. It was sent off to Melbourne. And Dr. Blair gave his expert technical interpretation of the facts. The Chinaman's powder contains nothing new, he said. Musk, camphor, potash, copper sulfate, nitrate of potash, zinc sulfate, carbonate of lime. These necessarily act as astringents, caustics, and escharotics. In the hands of an ignorant man, these local applications will be productive of a grievous amount of harm. Arsu is an ignorant pretender. Was Dr. Blair racist? Yes, he was. Fucking racist. Right, so we're seeing racism, we're seeing arrogance, and we're seeing authority, autocratic behavior here. And there's some other motifs we're going to draw out here, and maybe we'll see them in current research as well. We're seeing reductionism, right? Pulling the thing into its chemicals and saying what the different chemicals do, and then saying, well, this is what they necessarily do, because this is what we know about them. Focusing on theory and ignoring data. They ignored the fact that this guy had cured loads and loads of kids. What else have we got? Clinicians performing the trial. You see that a lot in, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Assuming the ignorance of the people who are using the medicine. And attacks in the media, because Dr. Blair then berated the press and the public for believing in this nonsense. And all kinds of things came out in the media. And Arsu, and in fact all Chinese doctors, were not allowed to call themselves doctors anymore. Right? This was the result of it. The law stepped in and legislated against this poor guy. So and fatal consequences. Children died as a result of this particular type of knowledge system, this particular filter. So let's have a look at these motifs and see how we're doing in ayahuasca research. This was a paper in the Journal of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics, subjective cardiovascular effects, monoamine, metabolite, right? It's about dose response, right? So does ayahuasca have a dose response, i.e. does it get stronger as you take more? And they used freeze-dried ayahuasca, never seen that in the jungle. 3 of the 18 people were excluded for vomiting. And the conclusion, this approach can identify dose-response relationships. Can it? So my experience with dose response, a friend of mine drank 13 glasses of Daimi once in a session. He was all right. Another session I was at, one guy came along, he was on antibiotics, didn't want to drink, and eventually well, it happened that, come on, have a little drop. How about just a little drop in the second half? And he had a little drop. And he was lay down and he was flying. I talked to him afterwards. He was absolutely flying throughout the entire thing, right? Dose response? Don't know, if you're familiar with Daimu, with ayahuasca, it has a crazy dose response. Right, this is a pregnant woman, obviously. Should pregnant women take ayahuasca? That's an interesting question, isn't it? A very contentious question. So there was a study on this in reproductive toxicology, and basically what they did was they gave it to rats, and concluded that daily use by pregnant women may pose risks for the conceptus. Right, so in my lineage, in Daimi, pregnant women will drink all the way through their pregnancies, for example. Considered terribly, terribly naughty, but that's what they do. In Shipibo culture, Shipibo shamans, the women, will drink well, they will lower their dose in the third trimester, right? These people know what they're doing, all right? But anyway, so there was a study in Istoe, or there was a study done, and it was published in Istoe, the results saying that it was dangerous for children. Right, what did they do in this test? Well, they gave them 8 times the equivalent dose of ayahuasca, right? Rats. To put that in context, water kills you if you drink 8 times your daily dose of water, right? Rats can't vomit. And nearly half of the rats were killed by this procedure. And obviously, they lost their babies. Half of them died, right? So this is a knowledge system. This is a way of generating data about ayahuasca, right? Do we know anything more than the Shipibos because we've killed some rats? So what we've got here, so clinicians performing the trials. This isn't like shamans or people like me, Daimistas performing the trials. This is clinicians, right? So where are we going next? So this was a study by Beckley. Ayahuasca enhances creative divergent thinking, right? Studying on the effects of ayahuasca on cognition. Very interesting. So how did they do this? Well, they got a picture of an umbrella and a picture of a squirrel, and they said, how many things can you find that a squirrel has in common with an umbrella, right? When you drink more ayahuasca, you find more things in common with a squirrel and an umbrella. Science. Jeremy Narby wanted, so that's what happens when clinicians perform the trial, right? Jeremy Narby, he published The Cosmic Serpent and was completely dissed he had to look up the word hogwash when he was reading, I think, the New Scientist review. And he got cross and he said, well, I'm going to do some science. And he wanted to know if ayahuasca gives you access to the information at a molecular level of plants, which is what the shamans seem to think. So what did he do? He got 3 molecular biologists who are struggling in their work somewhere. They're all heads of departments. And he took them to the Amazon, where he got an indigenous person, a shaman, to give them brew. What happened? All 3 of them had breakthroughs in their work. 2 of them encountered plant spirits. 1 of them got divorced. 1 of them became a Tai Chi teacher. All kinds of things happened. This was, who funded this? He funded it. No one wanted to fund this thing, right? So he funded it with the American sales of The Cosmic Serpent. Who published it? No one wanted to publish it either. So he had to self-publish it. He put it in the back of Shamans Through Time, which has got more information on ayahuasca than most journals put together. Yeah, self-funded, self-published. Why is that? Are we not interested in this kind of thing? Gabon Maté was treating people in Canada. Wonderful film, Jungle Prescription, by that gentleman at the back there. All right, so he found that 50%, so basically it was really, really good at treating alcohol and crack addiction. He got a shaman over from South America and was treating people who were addicts. And he was given a cease and desist order for this and told not to do it anymore, right? So this is the situation where we're at with our research. I don't know if anyone here has heard of the contraindication between SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Yeah, if you're going to drink Daimi, you're going to drink ayahuasca, you mustn't take antidepressants. Have you heard this? Well, yeah, okay. So nearly 20 years ago, in fact over 20 years ago now, Callaway and Grob came up with a theoretical contraindication. They said that basically there might be a problem with the interaction of these 2 chemicals, all right? The UDV never believed them, so the UDV continued giving vegetal, ayahuasca, to people who were on antidepressants. No one died. There's never been a single case of someone dying from serotonin syndrome, which was which was the suggestion here. This is Eddie Frexke. He says this is Toffoli. There is no single report of any death or doubtless case of serotonin syndrome that could be attributable to Aya and SSRIs. There's been no research on this. Not a single paper, not a single study has been done on this. Right, so why are we still following this taboo? You know, every tribe has a taboo. Here we've got one, you know. In the jungle, you don't eat certain things and you don't have sex for a few days before you drink ayahuasca. Over here, you don't take selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So there's no data for this at all. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? There are fatal consequences of this. 13% of Americans are on antidepressants, and 50% of suicide victims suffer from depression. This kills people. This way of because those people who are on antidepressants can't drink ayahuasca, and as some of you will be aware, ayahuasca is really, really good for depression. Right? Last time I gave this talk, someone was telling me about really desperately trying to come off antidepressants so she could take ayahuasca, and she was suicidal. Right? Why are we doing this to people? All right, so analysis. There's various ways of analysing stuff. So we've looked at a mathematical analysis, brainwave analysis, going into those machines. That's me, having psilocybin, and looking at a screen and looking at some pictures of chaos and saying if I could see an object. Was it an animate object or an animate object? That was the trial. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Did they ask me to do what I normally do when I'm on psychedelics, which is pray and sing songs? No, they didn't do that. Have they got people doing icaros in these wonderful brain imaging things? No, that doesn't happen. A friend of mine who was with the Imperial team, he used to get up really early in the morning and smudge the place, but before anyone got there, didn't want them to know. All right, so that kind of analysis. Psychoanalysis psychiatry, right? There's meant to be a conversation between psychology and psychedelics. When it's very difficult, you see, there's a certain set of words in psychology, psychiatry. One of those is hallucination, right? It means seeing something which isn't there. If you're starting out with that kind of language, how are we going to have a conversation? Because when I drink Daimi, I see stuff that is there. When I hear voices, that's not because I'm insane. That's not dissociative identity disorder. Certainly, you know, we have exclusion criteria. You know, if you're a little bit shaky, if you're a little bit mental, you probably shouldn't drink ayahuasca. You know, however, you know, if you hear voices in the jungle, you should definitely drink ayahuasca. You should listen to what they say. Maybe they've got something interesting to say, right? So, so neo-colonialism, we're talking about the silencing of indigenous voices, the silencing of indigenous knowledge practice, but actually the silencing of the spirits themselves, right? This is colonialism going into the astral realm, as far as I'm concerned. Chemical analysis, yeah, so back to the McKenna brothers came up with this idea that ayahuasca is a combination of monoamine oxidase inhibitor and DMT. It's a DMT administration route. Is it? No, not really. There's a whole lot more to it than that. Ayahuasca itself, just the vine, is drunk just by itself by some tribes. That's where the teachings are. So yeah, there's problems with all these kind of analysis, but none so grave as the problems with anthropological analysis. 1886, Alfred Simpson was one of the first to get down to the jungle and observe ayahuasca, and he said, when considering savage customs, we must remember the inconsistency, vagueness, and superstition which pervade the savage's mind and actions. Was he racist? Yes. In 1906, when Madison Grant put a pygmy in the zoo, in a cage, was he racist? Yes. Right. In 2017, when Jack Hunter, was he here? Submitted a chapter to the Supernatural in History, Society and Culture. His chapter was rejected because of publications and associations in which he present information that supports claims to the ontological reality of supernatural phenomena. Right? There's nothing wrong with his article, but elsewhere he published claims which support something which, how do I put this, brown people from the global south generally believe in. So were these editors racist? I don't know. I mean, we need to be careful throwing around accusations of racism. We need to be very, very careful throwing around accusations of racism. So what about this article then? Racism and the discrimination against cannabis by ayahuasca users in Brazil. So this was by Ed McCrae, professor of anthropology at Federal University of Bahia. And he argued in this. Basically, here's the premise, right? There's different lineages of Daimi. In my lineage, we don't use cannabis. In a kind of offshoot lineage, they do use cannabis. That's totally cool. That's what they do. Now, this guy argued that the reason that my lineage hasn't accepted the introduction of cannabis is because what we're trying to do is distance ourselves from anything from black culture by behaving as much as we can like white people. Or I say we, I'm talking about basically people in the jungle here, all right? Just want to make that quite clear. So there's no understanding of any specialized knowledge that these people might have around the mixture of these two plants. If you go to pretty much anywhere, 10 minutes, oh great. If you go to pretty much anywhere in the jungle, your dieta, to go and drink ayahuasca, your dieta will include cannabis, right? Most lineages do not mix these two things, right? And even indigenous folk, there's what's the tribe? The Kofani. There's the Kofani shaman who, he likes cannabis, but he says these two don't mix. They're all right for musical works, but they're not good for cure works, right? There is a whole knowledge system which says these things don't mix, right? If you want to mix them, it's fine. But then to argue that I don't want to mix them because I've got internalized racism, to argue that a cultural expression coming out of Brazil is in the way that it is because of brown people wanting to look like white people is, I think, an extremely problematic argument to make. And it was a very badly made argument as well. So I responded to this. Actually, I asked the editor of Chacruna, why did you publish this? And she said, in order to stimulate debate. So I wrote a response, and she refused to publish it. I ran my response by Jeremy Narby, for example. He thought it was all right. Anyway, why are we playing this game? Yeah. Why are we playing this game? Why do we care so much about getting good scientific evidence? Why are we trying to get our point across this way? There's been good evidence on cannabis not being that bad for about 40 years. Right? Has it changed policy? No, it didn't change policy, not at all. This did. This is Billy Caldwell and his mum, I think her name is Charlotte Caldwell, who brought some cannabis oil back from Canada, announced it for her son, who was having lots and lots of epileptic fits. Right? This looks like it may have had a little bit of impact and might be changing the law in cannabis. Right? Nothing to do with the science, to do with a very sad story about a mother and her child. So why are you playing the game? 20,000 scientists have signed a paper warning about the future of humanity. Has this changed policy? No. So, I mean, if science is so powerless to actually do the stuff we want it to do in public discourse, why are we still pursuing this? And what else could we do? Perhaps could we start listening to what indigenous people have to say? All right? Why haven't we done any studies on what the menstrual cycle does? Why haven't we done any studies? And I've looked into this. There aren't any studies in the academic world about the difference between drinking ayahuasca when you're on dieta, when you've not been having sex for a while, or when you have been. All right? I've looked, in the psychological studies, they don't even ask the question. And this is ubiquitous, almost ubiquitous in the indigenous world. You don't, you take a break from sex before you drink ayahuasca. Can ayahuasca cure cancer? The correct answer to this question, bear in mind this is a question asked by someone who's dying of cancer. There are serious consequences about the way that we approach these questions. The correct answer to this question is, I don't know, ask someone from a culture that's been using it for centuries. Thank you very much. Just 1 second, I forgot to say, this is my second book. It's on sale here, just round there. It's about all kinds of wonderful things, linguistics and psychology and neurobiology and what's going on in our heads. That's my second book. First book, there is some there as well. That's my Twitter handle, and groovy. Thank you very much.
We have about 5 minutes.